YT just unveiled the cheapest version of a great bike, but is it cheap enough? Let's talk about it. Hey everyone, Josh here again with Daily Mountain Bike Rider, and yesterday YT hit us with some big news. They unveiled the cheapest full suspension bike in their lineup. That is the Capra and what is called the Core 1 Spec, and this comes in at $2,700. For those of you not familiar, the Capra is a do-it-all, well really it's an enduro mountain bike that's longer traveled. It's a little heavier, but I think it's what most people want on the bike market right now. And this bike has been right around the $3,000 mark, and then they swoop in and cut the price down. And I think it's in response to the fact that a lot of us are complaining that bike prices are getting too high. So let's jump into what this bike actually gets you for the price, why I think they're reducing it and creating this model, and really what I think this means long-term. So let's jump in first to the Core 1. So first up, I should say I found this bike because YT dropped a video. They always have very catchy videos with a cool intro saying this bike is the GOAT from a little kid. And then what you see right off the bat is what I think is a beautiful color. I think black bikes are too boring. We need some pop. And this is, I think, called slime green. And then when we get to the build of what it actually looks like, that's when things get a little more interesting. As we scroll down, the first picture we see, it has a Zeb up front, which I think is interesting. It's not the lower end domain. And then on the back, we have the Super Deluxe. That's the piggyback rear shock. And overall, we see a 12-speed drivetrain. It looks like some cheaper wheels. Moving down to the specs, this is where we're gonna see where the cost cutting comes from and if the bike's actually gonna hold up. So first noteworthy thing that we see off the bat is the wheel set is a Sunringle. These are known as being cheaper wheel sets. You can find a complete wheel for a couple $100. And I have not ridden one of these. I cannot speak to them, but this one looks like it has a beefier 32mm internal width. So it should be a little more heavy hitting, probably heavier in general. Then to the suspension, we get the RockShox Zeb base, and this has a Rush RC damper, which I'm going to be honest, I have not heard of. I know of the Charger RC damper that comes on the select models of the Zeb, which is really good, but I don't know the difference between the Rush, and I can't find anything online. So let me know if you know the difference. Obviously it's a cheaper version. And then you have the Super Deluxe Select R. R stands for rebound, which means it does not have a lockout switch on it. This is a great rear shock. The Zeb has been a great fork. I'm curious about this damper, but overall, the suspension's pretty good for the price. As we go down, we get to what we would expect, which is an NX Eagle drivetrain. I've used this drivetrain before. I have friends who have been riding it for thousands of miles. It's not great. It's heavy, it's clunky, but it works. And then as we keep going, headset, stem bars, nothing really jumps out. SRAM DB8 brakes do, because these are SRAM's mineral oil code brakes. So you only get 90% of the performance, but they're actually extremely cheap. I looked elsewhere online. You can find these for $64 over on Backcountry. And again, quad piston, mineral oil, SRAM brakes with 90% of the quality is what they say. Those are pretty good. I'm not surprised that they're spec'd on here. If I bought this bike, I would run it. Then we get to the weight, and it says 36 pounds, which is a heavy bike, but it's aluminum, it's long traveled, and that is kind of what you get. Overall, the spec, I'll be honest, I'm a little surprised at how good it is. It's spec'd pretty well for the price. And then when I compare it to the other models, the only other thing that really jumps out at me is this Core 2 NX, because since the Core 1 has an NX drivetrain, I'm curious what the price difference gets you, because the price difference of this one, if we look back down at the bottom, is just $400. And so if you spend $400, and this is a new build as well, what you get different is you get Fox suspension, so you get a Float X on the rear, a Fox 38 grip performance on the front, which is pretty awesome. And then you get updated Crank Brother wheels, and these are a lot more tried and true, at least what I'm familiar with. And so for me, if you ask me, is it worth it to spend the $400 to get Fox suspension as well as the Crank Brother wheel set? I would say it's up to you. Personally, I'd probably go with the Core 1. I don't think you can go wrong with either of these. Now, the question really comes, is this worth buying new? And I'm a person who recommends buying used because I think you can get a lot more bang for your buck. Some of you think that's ridiculous, but when you look at the out-the-door price where I live after taxes and shipping, you're paying $3,000 on the nose. And you have to ask yourself, as you look at the used bike market, can you buy a comparable bike for $3,000? I will say this is probably, no, I'm gonna say it, this is probably the best price of a downhill-oriented, long travel bike that you can find on the internet. If you look at companies like Specialized, an Enduro doesn't even come in aluminum, so you're gonna be spending $5,400. The Status 160 is probably the most comparable bike, and this is gonna start at, again, $3,000, which is comparable to the Core 2. I think YT is really trying to get the lower end of the market people to buy in. Now, onto why I think this is a big deal. I think bike companies are realizing demand for bike is going to go down into the future. I've talked about this. They've heard our complaints that bikes are getting too expensive. So what they're trying to do is try to find places to cut back, to create a high quality bike at a lower price. This is YT Stab, and I bet more companies are gonna come out with these builds. And the most interesting thing is this is the same frame that they have had since 2001. It's 2 years into its production. It's something that can be repainted for a new colorway, as we're seeing here, different specs put on and sold at a cheaper price so they can actually sell bikes. And I could be wrong, but I think this is going to be a trend that we're going to continue to see. Anyway, let me know what you think about this new YT model of the Capra. I think it's a great deal, but I'm curious if you agree that other companies are going to do this as well. You know what time it is. Don't spend too much time watching a guy talk about news in his garage, but get out there, ride your bike, and make sure you do it every day.